All right, y'all. Welcome back. We've got another Thunder Road podcast we're doing tonight. We've got one of my ex-athletes joining us on as our special guest. His name is Brandon Hazouri, and he currently coaches for the University of Western Illinois. Brandon was an elite athlete, started his journey in Birmingham, Alabama, before going on to run for Samford there in Birmingham, and rewrote the record books as an individual, had a couple good team performances, qualified for nationals, qualified for USAs, and then ended up going to run professionally. What was it, 2 years for Atlanta Track Club or 1 year?
Just one.
Okay. Chased the dream for a year and then got into coaching and started that journey right back at Samford, where he had run. And then before taking the job here at Western Illinois, and he's been there for, what has it been? Almost exactly a year now?
Yeah, just had a year, like 2 weeks ago. So
sweet. So heck of a time to get into coaching.
Yeah.
You timed it perfect.
Yeah, when I got here like November, I got here a couple days before Halloween. And we had 4 inches of snow on that Halloween, which is the most snow I've ever seen in my life, much less on Halloween.
Yeah.
Thanks, it's been fine this year. But yeah, it got here in November, had like 2 weeks of cross country season. Then they had, Thanksgiving finals week where you can't practice. Then they go home for Christmas break, 2 months of indoor, and then went home for spring break and never came back. So it was like, I had been here for 8 months at a point and had coached them for, face to face at least for like 2. So
yeah, dude, that's wild. But despite that, Brandon's gone on to bring in a lot of good talent. Has had some good time trials and things like that. So keep an eye out for his crew and what they do in the coming season whenever they do get to line up again. So, forgot to mention. So Brandon was a middle distance. We'll just call him a middle distance specialist, like 8:15. You never were 4.8. You were definitely
no. Wasn't a 4.8. Definitely wasn't a distance guy either.
So 147. What was it? 147.3 and 342.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So it was pretty hot on the track there. And I think, what did you miss the Olympics by, or the Olympic trials by? Was it one spot?
One spot. Yeah. And then, there's a guy who ended up not running. So it was
Nick Simmons. It was freaking Nick Simmons. I'm going to say it.
It was Nick Simmons. Yep. He had something going on with his foot. I remember messaging him like, "Hey man, like heard you thinking about not running. Like, think you could speed up that decision at all?" And he waited a little bit, and he was, however many time U.S. champ. So if anybody had the right to do it, it was him. But it was hard to watch the Olympic trials with an open lane there, knowing that I was the guy who killed it. But should have just ran faster. That's usually the solution. Run faster. So
to most problems, yeah, totally. Yeah. Well, Brandon and I were catching up the other day, and we were both kind of talking about our teams and the athletes we were working with. And we kind of got stuck on this topic about the idea of like postseason reflection and just like, hey, this time of year, like, what are you doing with your teams? What are athletes? Where are they at mentally? Like, what are some of the things they can be working on? And we both kind of agreed that like, this is the time of year when you sit down and you kind of grade yourself a little bit, as a coach and as an athlete. Like, hey, what did we do well? What did we do poorly? What can we do better? How can we grow? And for a lot of the people that we both work with, we both had a lot of really big breakthroughs with our athletes this year. And so in particular, like, there's another conversation to be had there of, okay, so how do you approach things after a breakthrough? Maybe you threw down a 30-second PR in the 5K, or, whether it was a 2 mile or whatever, distance you might race. It's like, hey, how do we approach that? Mentally and physically, what's the next step now? And I feel that it's so important that you find that next step quickly, whatever it might be, so that you don't stall out, in the lonely winter months when you're trudging through the snow or through the poor weather on your own, during Christmas break. So I guess that being said, Brandon had a really awesome breakthrough story where he qualified for the NCAA champs and threw down a massive PR. I was kind of hoping you could tell us a little bit about that day and maybe some of the stuff that led to the breakthrough and what that was like.
Yeah. So I think kind of going back to, I'll take it back a couple of years before that. So in high school, I was like a more middle of the road, I guess, type athlete, 418, 420 and change kind of guy. So was, competitive for the state of Alabama at the time, but, wasn't a Foot Locker All-American or anything like that. And it had a big breakthrough my freshman year, and I think ended up running a 149.0 as a freshman, and just thought like, oh, sweet, that's what you do. You 5 seconds a year in the 800, and next thing you know, you're there. And then ended up, I remember at the regional meet that year, got disqualified. That someone said I cut him off, ended up getting disqualified out of the prelims, but had advanced through. Found out later that night I got disqualified, so thought, well, it sucks. Like I was upset about it for sure. Didn't really think that I had broken any rule, but thought, hey, you're a freshman. Didn't think you'd be at this meet in general. Like now like come back next year and we'll do it. And then the next year ended up ran a little faster, like half second or so in the 8, like 148 mid or low, and qualified for regionals again. But the week after our conference championship, which at the time was like that last weekend in April, so we had like 3 to 4 weeks in between conference and regionals, got mono, and like just like was like crap, another year. And once again, it was probably when you're a college athlete, a college student, like put yourself in better situations, and people get mono all the time in college, but it was, looking back, it was probably avoidable. So I was like, man, like that sucks, another wasted opportunity. Just like, all right, putting a lot of pressure on this junior year, like this has to be the year that I do it. Like no longer want to be the guy who just makes the regional final and then goes home. And so like just whole goal of the year was let's make the national meet. And I think like even like just whole goal of a collegiate career is make a national meet, make a US championship. Like if I can do those two things, like, collegiately or post-collegiately, like I consider that a success. And it ended up having a good year, and was kind of stuck at that like 148 low. Had run probably between 148.0 and 148.5 3 or 4 times, and just kept. I was winning a lot of races, but wasn't never had that like just big PR jump. And finally got to the regional meet. Ended up sneaking by. I think I was the last guy into the final off of time, because tactically I ran a kind of a poor race in the prelim. But anyways, ended up, I think, getting 4th in my heat behind Craig Angles, Clayton Murphy, Brandon McBride. So looking back, it was like, man, that was a good company to be with.
Yeah.
But at the time, it was like, oh, these are just guys I'm racing now. I'm like, oh, yeah, they went on to do some stuff. And so like it was just huge breakthrough, because I ended up qualifying for the national meet. So checked the box there and ran 147 2 or 3, and I think the US standard at the time was 147.5. So like in less than 2 minutes, I'd accomplished everything I wanted to in the sport. And we just remember being like so happy on the cool down, just like man, like you're so high after a race like that. And then coming back to practice the next week, and just like you're a little flat. And I think in my case, like I said, I had accomplished everything I wanted to in one night. And so like, how do you come back emotionally from something like that and try and prepare yourself 10 days later, and then much less 2 weeks later after that to try and run a US championship against competition where at both levels the margin for error is a lot smaller. Like so at the NCAA meet compared to the regional meet, much smaller than at the US championship. I mean, like, nobody's thinking about the guy who was, ranked 25th going into it. And I think that both those races went pretty bad. I was not dead last at the NCAA meet, but pretty far in the back. And then at US championships was dead last in the prelim. Thankfully, I shouldn't say thankfully, but unless Dwayne Solomon hadn't blacked out that last 100 meters, if any of you guys go and watch the 2015 US championships, Dwayne Solomon, I think he's number 2 or number 3 all time US. He was talking about before, like, I'm going to take it out into the twilight zone, and this is the final. But he ends up going out and basically blacking out the last 100 meters, and ended up finishing. So his official time was like 3 minutes for the 800. So other than that, which probably doesn't count, I was the slowest guy at that meet. But yeah, so it was hard to come back from, I think.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So you had that's a really big lead up. I mean, we're talking 3 years in the making. something you had been kind of dreaming about and working for. And you kind of made that freshman jump and closed a big gap, almost you made it kind of sound accidentally like, yeah, oh, this just happens,
Well, it was like, I remember talking with Lori Strand, my coach at the time, and earlier in the year, and she was like, I don't know if you're an 800 meter guy. And I was like, yeah, I don't really know if I am either. Maybe I'll run the steeple, but our conference was kind of weak in the 800. And so I talked to him to let me run it. And it was I'll never forget, it was at Georgia Southern, and there's no clock on the track. It's a prelim, and the track was older at the time. And so it's one of those tracks where you can hear your spikes, and it sounds like there's just somebody right on your butt the whole time. So I remember taking out in the prelim thinking there's somebody right on my tail. And I think PR'd by like 3 or 4 seconds in that race, because I was just like, I got to make this final. And there was no one behind. I mean, I think I won the race by 4 seconds. But it was just, it was one of those things, like you said, it was almost an accident. Like, it wasn't thinking about it. It was just running.
Yeah. It's like you find yourself at this level, and then you start attacking something real. And and then it took 3 years to finally accomplish it. And like you said, I was flat after I accomplished it, man. I had the night of my life, and then I was flat. And I wonder, because a lot of athletes feel that way. Maybe they won a state title. Maybe their team won state. Maybe, they PR'd by 20 seconds at an invite on a fast course recently, and you go, okay, like, don't get flat, like what can we do better to keep this ball rolling, and what can we do better to make sure that when you do have that breakthrough, like, you can continue on and finish that season. And that's not the pinnacle, because and that's not why we race, to have pop off one good one and call it quits, So what do you feel like you could have done better? I mean, mentally, like 147.2, you're at NCAAs. Like, is there anything you feel like you could have done differently to help your brain stay on that level,
Yeah, I think it's probably less of what I could have done in that 2-week window, and more of what I could have done, like, leading up to it. And that's like the month before, and even like the years before. I think, like, when I got there, it just, like, I still had this feeling of, not necessarily that I didn't belong, because I had raced guys that were there all year, but I kind of let myself go back to like, dude, like, you were a 154 high school guy, and a guy who only ran that once or twice. Like, you should just be happy to be here. And kind of let that mindset sneak back in. And I think that just because my goal had been, like, let's just get there, that, if you tell yourself enough, like, that's the goal, then, like, what does it matter once you get there? And I think if I could go back and do it again, it's like, okay, like, maybe the goal shouldn't be let's just get there, but, like, let's perform well there. Like, let's I think, to use my case, for example, like let's go and show, like, what you should have done the past 2 years, right?
Yeah.
Rather than just, hey, let's go get a lanyard and take some cool pictures,
Yeah. Yeah.
If I could do it again, I think that would just be, like, treating myself with the respect of, like, feeling like I should be at that meet, or like, I could compete there.
And the way you frame out the season from the start. So like you said, maybe it starts at the beginning of cross or at the beginning of track. When you sit down and as an athletes and as coaches do at this time of year, they go, okay, what are we targeting on the track? What do you want to accomplish? I always like to kind of chime in there with athletes and go, hey, like, getting to the state meet isn't a goal. That's not a goal. Yeah. Performing well at the state meet is a goal. There's a big difference between the two. You know what I mean? And then it's like, and if postseason is in the picture, targeting postseason from the beginning. We're not saying the postseason stuff is more important than state. We're not saying USA's is more important than NCAA's. We're just saying, hey, like, if it's in the picture, like, don't flush it. You know, like have execution-based goals, not just performance ones as well.
Well, and I think that you can't, like you said, it has to be early too. Like, you can't just mentally decide. Like, you can't just decide, like, all right, like, now I'm gonna start to believe this, or now I'm gonna think this. Because I think it's more of a habit, and something that you have to, you've got to be thinking about, or using the approach of, thinking like that, like, constantly. Like, you can't just flip that switch when it comes.
Yeah. I can remember a big breakthrough of my own, and I struggled with something a little different personally than you did, but it was I think I PR'd by like 5 seconds or 6 seconds in the 1500 and qualified for USA's. And I can remember on the flight home, it sinking in. Same thing. I was on cloud nine. I qualified. My goal was to run well at USA's, so I was still in the zone. I didn't let off the gas by any means. But then the doubt started to creep in of like, how do I do that again? Like, was that a fluke? Like, did I just have the race of my life? Like I've never been able to do anything like that before. I've never felt that good before. Can I do it again? Or am I going to get on the line and am I going to be like my old self again? The old 346 guy that I was before that day. And I think that doubt started kind of clouding my self-belief or just aggressiveness on the track, and what I thought I could do. And I don't know. I guess there's something to that one as well. Just the idea that you're the same guy you woke up that morning, you're no different. You're not a different person just because you ran faster, right?
Yeah. I think every athlete has that fear that they're like tricking themselves almost too, right? Or like the fear that like, what if I go all in on this and I'm still not as good as I want to be, Or what if you, like you said, like, what if I can't repeat it? But I think that it's just like one of those things, and we talked about this a little earlier of like, and coincidentally enough, two people that you've already had on here, Pat and Carissa, and I remember after Carissa won an NCAA championship, which is like, we're talking about, qualifying for NCAA. I mean, she's, someone who's winning it, and him talking about after, it's like, ultimately, like, she's the same person that she was this morning. Now it's just like she's got this time to her name. It's not, it doesn't change anything. It's now what's your response to being somebody who's no longer an underdog. And I think that's why some athletes excel and do better, is because they can handle that.
Yeah. And it is a change, and nothing really changes. Like the process is the same. What you're doing on a daily basis changes. Same race, same track, same distance, same game. Just the idea that you got the little title next to your name, whatever, new PR or NCAA champ or state champ or whatever it might be. And you only get to be an underdog once, really. And then, you do one thing one time and you are never an underdog again. It becomes the expectation. And so I think it's important to remind athletes like, hey, you're the same guy you were before you started this season, before you had the breakthrough. Like we're only asking for 100% of what you have to give, no more. We're not asking you to be, Olympic champion here, or maybe we are, but like, depends on who you are. But we're not asking for anything you haven't done before. I don't know. So I did eventually find that for myself, and took a lot of confidence in the idea that like, all we're asking for is all you got, right? Even after a breakthrough.
Well, and I think like when you're talking about like goals and stuff, like that should almost be like, that's what, like when I was nervous before race, like those are the kind of thoughts that I would try and think. It's like, dude, like all you can do is run as hard as you can. Like, and you'll never finish a race and like, be sitting there with a ton of regret because you ran too hard. Maybe you run stupidly. Maybe you go out and 55 seconds when you're not ready to run that fast. You know what I mean? But like if the effort's there and that's your goal, and that's like part of your process or part of your goals, and like you can always check that box. And so like when I was an athlete, and this is a little bit of a side tangent, but if you're someone who gets really nervous before a race, like step back and think like, all right, like, do I trust myself that I'm going to put myself in the best position? Am I going to run as hard as I can? Like, and most of the time with athletes, like if you've gotten this far, the answer to that is yes. So that should be kind of a calming feeling,
Yeah. It's a very different kind of disappointment when you lose having executed well, and when you lose knowing that you just punked out.
Yeah.
It's totally different emotion, and everybody's been there, where maybe there was a chip in the armor and they didn't finish a race as hard as they could, or they got lost or dazed out. And it's like, dude, that one is like it was almost infuriating when I had one of those days after the fact. Like I couldn't believe I let the opportunity slip, Jesus. So, I don't know. So I don't mean to get I don't mean to get off track with the goals here, but I did want to circle back around to the idea. Okay, so like we've broken down an athlete's performance. We've broken down their execution and the process that we're within, and maybe we had breakthroughs and we're learning to deal with those. Okay, so now the next phase, right, is what is the next goal? Like what do we want to do on the track? What kind of goals do we have for ourselves? Like, is there anything in particular that you've seen as far as goal setting that you like? I've got my own structure and you're familiar with it. Is there anything that you've had success with as an athlete or anything?
Yeah, I think like I think for me, like I always knew like what the next logical step was in training, or I guess in racing, right? So if it's to make a regional meet first year, then it's to make a national meet the next time you're there. If it's run 149, then it's to run 140, 148, 147. You know what I mean? So I think from that standpoint, like I was always just pretty like level-headed about goals. Like I didn't go, all right, I ran 149, now I got to run 144. Like I was pretty incremental with most of my goals. I think that like the biggest thing is, and what I try and tell my athletes is like your goals need to be, or they shouldn't, they don't all have to be this, but I think a large part of your goal should be things that you can control, things that you can put into your training, things that you can put into your lifestyle. Because like you don't know what race you're going to get in. You don't know, like maybe training's been perfect and you get to the race and someone takes, you're trying to run, you want to break 420 in the mile for the first time, and you sit in the pack and someone takes it out in 70, right? And it's like, well, yeah, they're getting the opportunity. And so I think that like just to have your goals be as much of things that you can control in terms of like sleep, eating habits. I think attitude. I don't think we make like goals about attitude enough. Like I think that's something that I talk with my team a pretty good amount about, is like what are things that, like, the way I think, the way I come to practice, the way that when the weather's bad or when a workout doesn't go well, like what's my emotional response to that, and am I making goals to improve that? So I think things like that are like when I have a goal setting like meeting with an athlete, I think that's most of what we talk about. And that's not to ignore like ultimately, like, there's going to be a time by your name. And that's why we're all doing it. We all want to run fast. We all want to win races. And that's not to downplay the importance of that, because ultimately, like, that's why most of us are doing this, right? Is to do those things. But I think that you're going to put yourself in a better situation if your goal is like, I'm going to win as many races as I can this season. And like, eventually you keep winning races, you're going to run fast times, or, like some of these other like kind of process type goals. So that's typically when I talk goals with athletes, that's more what they revolve around. And then just like, okay, like what do you want that to result in? And that's kind of how we get to that conversation of times and things like that. But I try to make sure that we're a little bit more focused on process of it.
I like it. Yeah. I like it because there's definitely steps in between the time. It's like, okay, I'm here and I want to get there. It sounds like you kind of start with, okay, well, like, what are the boxes we need to start ticking now in order to get there? And that's kind of the way I love that. And talking about the process oriented stuff, obviously the process is key, and we could sit here and talk about that all day.
Yeah.
But when I do goal setting, and I've done this with a couple different athletes already this year, I like to do it backwards. I like to start with the time. Give me the goal, right? Like, give me the goal. Give me something you think is 100% accomplishable. Give me the 80% accomplishable, meaning 80% chance I'll do this year. Then give me a 60%, something that you're almost scared to say, the big hairy ass goal. That's like, you don't want your friends to know you think you want to try and do that. You know what I mean? Like, I want to know, like, where's your head at? Yeah. And it's like, okay, that's an exciting thing. Stop. Now let's reverse it back, and then let's connect the dots to how do we get there? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just like you said, okay, let's go back to the process. Like, dude, you can't be sleeping 6 hours a night if you want to run sub 420. Dude, you can't, you can't be whatever it might be. You know what I mean?
It's funny. I actually remember like when you first got to Sanford, like sitting in your office, and we were like, and I don't know if this was the exact conversation, or but I remember like talking to you, like what are your goals, or what would you consider a successful year? And I was like, at this time I'm like a 409, 410 mile or something like that, and I'm like I know it sounds crazy, but I think I want to break 4 minutes,
Yeah.
and like, you know what I mean? And I remember like you like being like, yeah, it's not that crazy, but like, we've got work to do. So I
Yeah.
think, like, I know it's funny because I was probably like, you're talking about what you do with your athletes right now, but I can remember being on the other side of that.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And it's like, there's something too, like, it's like when you set a goal, you want your coach to be real. You want your coach to tell you, hey, that you want to be able to sit there and go, this is where we are,
Yeah.
and then instead of saying, I don't think you can do that, respond with like, this is what it's going to take. Like, okay, you want that result? Well, the day you can run 3 by mile at this pace on 200 float is the day you can do that. I think, you know what I mean? Like, and then when you get there, whether it happens or it doesn't, you can always look back and go like, well, I didn't get there physically,
Yeah.
but man, I've seen too many guys running 10 flat in high school end up running 14:30 to sit here and tell some kid they can't do it. It's like,
Yeah.
forget that. Like, hey, this is how you do it, right? And then we'll see.
But I mean, I think a lot of the kind of athletes that we recruit are kind of in that similar range of 9:40 to 10 minute type guys. And I tell them all the time, it's like, dude, you come here, like, I'm not going to tell you what you can and can't do, because go watch the marathon Olympic trials. And,
Yeah.
2024, how many of those guys were 10-minute high school guys in 5K who can now run 5-minute pace for 26 miles? You know what I mean? It's just like everybody's timeline is different. But I also think like on the other side of that, like, you have to be realistic with where you're at, like, for your starting point too. Because I also talk to athletes who, I've run 10 minutes, but like I can run 9:30. I know I can run 9:30. And like at some point you got to be honest with where your starting point is, so that you're not like, the guy who's a 10-minute guy goes and runs 9:40, it's a 20-second PR, and still thinks he should be running 9:15 now. You know what I mean? So I think it's like being honest with where you're at to start as well.
Yeah. And that's a tricky one too, as a coach, just because I love the kid that thinks he can run that fast.
Yeah.
Because it's like, man, that's the one you want on the line, because he's the one going, hey, I'm not scared of anybody. I think I can do that.
Absolutely.
Like you said, as long as they're being realistic with the training, and everything leading up to that point. But yeah, I love that guy. It's just, there's got to be enough truth and honesty in the conversation when it's had, so.
Yeah. And I think it's like what you said. It's like you want someone who's going to like believe that they can be that person, but like also coach, you gotta be like, okay, well, like here's what that person, like, here's what it takes. Once you can connect the two dots of like, here's what it takes, here's where I'm currently at, here's what I want to be, and then you're working towards that. I think that the picture becomes a little bit more clear.
Totally. Well, Brandon, thanks for joining us, dude. We'll have to have you back on soon.
Heck yeah. Looking forward to that hat in the mail.
Dude, I'll mail it to you. I'm not even joking.